Most people take sound for granted: the chatter of friends, the clinking of glasses, the laughter that fills a room. But for some, silence isn't a choice, it's life. And in that silence, kindness sounds louder than anything, and cruelty cuts deeper than words ever could. That night, inside a crowded diner, a young deaf waiter tried to do his job, smiling, patient, doing his best to communicate. But when a group of men decided his silence was funny, they didn't notice who was sitting just a few tables away. Because when Jason Statham turned around, everything stopped. Before we continue, I just want to take a moment to thank each and every one of you watching. Your support means the world to us. Every like, comment, and share helps us bring more powerful stories like this one to life. So if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe, because what happens next, you won't want to miss. The night was alive with sound, laughter, clinking silverware, the steady hum of conversations blending into one soft wave of noise. Inside the little corner diner on 8th and Main, life moved like it always did: quick, casual, careless. Most customers never looked twice at the people serving their food. They just ordered, ate, paid, and left. But tonight, one man's silence stood out. He moved carefully between tables, a small notepad in one hand, his eyes bright and alert. Every smile he gave was genuine, but behind it, a quiet effort. His name was Eli. He couldn't hear the laughter, couldn't hear the orders, couldn't hear the music playing faintly from the jukebox near the counter. He communicated through written notes, hand gestures, and patient smiles. And though life had taught him to expect impatience, he kept showing kindness, one order at a time. At the far side of the diner, 3 young men had gathered in a booth. They looked like the kind who had too much to prove and not enough to lose: loud, careless, always needing someone else to be smaller so they could feel big. The leader, a tall guy with a leather jacket and a smirk that never left his face, watched Eli set a plate down at the next table. He nudged his friend and whispered something, then laughed. "Hey," the man called out, snapping his fingers. "Yo, waiter, you deaf or something?" Eli didn't react. He didn't hear it. He was writing an order on his pad for another table, unaware of the cruelty building behind him. The 3 laughed louder. "Guess he is deaf," one of them said, mockingly waving his hand near his ear. People at nearby tables shifted uncomfortably, pretending not to notice. It's what people did: look away, stay quiet, keep the peace that wasn't really peace at all. A few tables away, Jason Statham sat alone. He was halfway through his meal, calm as always, dressed simply, a dark shirt, no noise, no attention drawn, but he was listening, watching. Jason's eyes flicked toward the booth. He didn't move yet. He'd seen this kind of thing before. Sometimes, people revealed who they really were, not through big moments, but in how they treated someone who couldn't fight back. Eli approached their table, holding his notepad, smiling politely. He placed the paper in front of them. On it, written in clear handwriting: "Hi, I'm deaf. Please point to what you'd like or write it down. I'll take care of you the best I can. Thank you." The leader grinned. "Oh, this is perfect," he said, elbowing his friend. "Hey, watch this." He exaggeratedly pointed to the menu, pretending to gesture like sign language, then started waving nonsense hand motions, gibberish, mock signs. His friends burst out laughing. Eli smiled nervously, not understanding the mockery but sensing the tone, the cruel laughter, the stares. He wrote something quickly on the pad. "Would you like fries with your meal?" The leader looked at it, then snatched the notepad from his hand. He scribbled something down and handed it back with a smirk. Eli read it. His face fell. It said, "I'd like you to stop wasting air." The laughter grew louder. Heads turned. The noise spread. Jason set his fork down slowly. Eli didn't respond. He simply nodded, lips pressed together, and walked away, back toward the counter, back into the silence that had always been both his refuge and his curse. He wiped his hands, grabbed a tray, tried to focus on his next order, but his hands shook. The words from the note burned in his mind. He had learned to let things go, but that didn't make it hurt less. One of the older customers near the window, a man with gray hair and kind eyes, leaned over and whispered to his wife, "Poor kid, doesn't deserve that." Jason heard it, so did the bullies. "Poor kid," the leader mocked loudly. "Oh, come on, don't act like it's our fault he can't hear. He laughed again, taking a sip of his drink. Jason's jaw flexed. He looked down, took a breath, then finally stood. The motion was subtle, no dramatics, no announcement, but something about it made people pause. The laughter didn't stop, but it weakened, uncertain. Jason walked past Eli, who didn't see him coming. He placed a hand gently on the young man's shoulder. Eli turned, surprised. Jason pointed to the pad and gestured with a calm hand, writing down a few words himself. "You're doing a good job. Don't let them get to you." Eli looked at the note, then back at Jason. His eyes glistened for a moment, gratitude without sound. He nodded once. Jason nodded back, then he turned toward the booth. The air in the diner shifted. You could feel it like the hum before a storm. The three men looked up, still smirking, but there was hesitation now. The one in the middle, the leader, leaned back. "Oh, look who it is," he said. "You want something, old man?" Jason stopped at their table, calm, expression unreadable. "You had your fun," he said quietly. His voice wasn't raised, but it cut through the entire diner. The laughter stopped completely. "Hey, relax," the man said, holding up his hands in mock defense. "We were just kidding around." Jason's eyes didn't move. "No," he said, "you were." The man's smile faltered. "Listen, it's not your business." Jason leaned slightly closer. "When you humiliate someone for something they can't control, you make it everyone's business." A silence fell heavy across the room. Even the cooks in the back had gone still. The man tried to laugh it off, but it came out hollow. "You don't know who you're talking to." Jason tilted his head slightly. "Neither do you." And just like that, something in the bully's face changed, a flash of recognition, realization, and fear. He leaned back, mumbling under his breath. "All right, fine, whatever." Jason didn't move for a moment. Then he said calmly, "You're going to apologize." The man frowned. "What?" Jason nodded once. "You heard me." "I said I." Jason's tone sharpened, still quiet but firm as iron. "Apologize now." Every eye in the diner was on them. The bully hesitated, looking at his friends for backup. None came. Finally, he turned toward Eli, who stood near the counter, holding a coffee pot, unsure what was happening. The man muttered something half-heartedly. "Sorry, man." Jason's gaze didn't break. "Say it properly." The man swallowed hard, stood up, and faced Eli. "I'm sorry," he said louder. Eli didn't hear the words, but he saw the apology in the man's eyes. And for the first time that night, he smiled, not out of weakness but grace. Jason turned, gave Eli a small nod, and walked back to his table. The tension in the air melted away slowly, replaced by something quiet and powerful: respect. Eli went back to work, moving between tables with new steadiness. The older couple near the window clapped softly, not loud enough to embarrass him, but just enough to remind him that goodness still existed. And Jason, he just sat back down, finished his meal, and left a bill on the table with a folded note tucked beneath it. When Eli later cleared the table, he found it. The note said, "You can't always hear kindness, but it's there. Keep walking proud." When Jason stepped outside into the cool night, the world was quiet again. But inside that little diner, something had changed, not just for Eli, but for everyone who witnessed it. Because sometimes, the loudest sound in the room is silence met with courage. The night outside was calm, the city lights shimmering against puddles that reflected fragments of neon. Jason walked slowly, hands in his pockets, the cool wind brushing past his face. He'd been in hundreds of tense rooms before, situations far worse than a few cruel men in a diner, but this felt different. It wasn't the confrontation that stayed with him, it was Eli's silence. That look, the quiet pain, the way his shoulders stiffened when laughter turned to cruelty, Jason had seen it before. In soldiers, in himself. The look of someone trying to stay invisible, to survive another moment of being misunderstood. He paused on the sidewalk, glancing back through the window. Eli was still inside, cleaning a table, unaware of Jason watching him. The young man smiled faintly as he wiped down a booth, his hands trembling slightly but his focus unbroken. Jason nodded to himself, then continued walking. Inside, the diner began to feel lighter again. The bullies had paid their bill and left quickly, avoiding eye contact. Conversation slowly returned, cautious at first, then natural, as if nothing had happened. But for Eli, everything had happened. He stood behind the counter, watching the steam rise from a pot of coffee. His reflection stared back at him in the stainless steel, tired and pale. He touched his notepad, still open to the page Jason had written on. "You're doing a good job, don't let them get to you." He read the words over and over, tracing the ink with his finger. He didn't know who the man was, but the moment Jason stood up, it felt like the world had changed shape, like someone had finally seen him. And for the first time in a long while, Eli felt something he hadn't in years: safe. The night ended, and the diner emptied out. As the last customer left, Eli walked over to the corner table where Jason had sat. The napkin holder was slightly crooked, the plate empty, but there was something under the folded receipt. He pulled it out, $100 bill, and the handwritten note. "You can't always hear kindness, but it's there. Keep walking proud." He stared at it, eyes wet, the noise of the kitchen fading into the distance. His chest tightened. He'd worked this job for 3 years, saving every dollar for a hearing aid that insurance wouldn't cover. He'd learned to lip read, to write, to stay patient, but he'd never expected this. He folded the note carefully and placed it in his apron. He didn't need to hear the words to feel them. The next morning, the diner opened at sunrise as usual. The smell of pancakes filled the air, and the regulars filtered in: truck drivers, construction workers, tired parents with kids before school. Eli moved quietly between tables, his rhythm slower but surer than ever. He smiled more, his eyes meeting people's with renewed confidence. The memory of the night before hadn't faded. It had carved something new inside him. Halfway through his shift, the door opened, and for a moment everything stopped. Jason Statham stepped in. He wasn't in a suit or anything fancy, just jeans, a black shirt, and that same calm presence that made people instinctively clear a path. The manager, a woman in her 50s named Marla, blinked in surprise. "Good morning," she said. "Table for one." Jason gave a small nod. "Actually, I wanted to speak to your waiter, the one from last night." Marla turned. "Eli." Eli froze mid-step. He hadn't expected to ever see him again. Jason offered a faint smile and motioned toward the booth where he'd sat before. Eli nodded and followed him over, setting down a cup of coffee. He took out his notepad, ready to communicate, but Jason had already written something on a small piece of paper and slid it across the table. "How's your morning, Eli?" Eli smiled. The simple act of someone remembering his name meant more than most people would ever realize. He scribbled back, "Good, better, thanks to you." Jason read it, then looked up. "You made it better yourself." There was silence, but the kind that felt full, not empty. Jason sipped his coffee, then leaned back slightly. "Do you like working here?" he asked, writing the words down. Eli hesitated, then nodded, but his eyes betrayed a weariness, a quiet kind of longing that said there was something else he dreamed about. He wrote, "It's good work. I just wish people could see past the silence." Jason read it slowly, his expression softened. He nodded once, not out of pity but respect. "I do." For the next few minutes they didn't talk much. Jason ate. Eli refilled cups and took other orders. But every time their eyes met, there was mutual understanding, the kind built not from words but shared experience. Near the counter, one of the regular customers, the older man from last night, approached and handed Eli a folded napkin. Inside was a few bills. Eli frowned and shook his head, trying to return it. The man smiled and wrote something on a receipt. "For the way you handled yourself last night. Don't lose that heart, kid." Eli didn't know what to say. He nodded, tears threatening to break through. Jason watched from his booth, saying nothing, but his chest tightened with quiet pride. Later that afternoon, as the lunch rush died down, Jason stood to leave. He approached the counter where Marla was refilling sugar containers. "You've got a good man working for you," he said. Marla looked up, smiling. "Eli? Yeah, hardest worker I've ever had. Hasn't missed a single shift in 3 years." Jason nodded. "He deserves better." Marla sighed. "I know, but times are tough. He's been saving for hearing aids, said they're too expensive." Jason nodded slowly, his eyes thoughtful. Then he reached into his jacket and placed an envelope on the counter. Marla blinked. "What's this?" His hearing aids, Jason said simply, and maybe a day off. Before she could respond, he walked out. That evening, after his shift, Eli was cleaning the last table when Marla called him over. "Got something for you," she said, holding up the envelope. He frowned, confused. She handed it to him with a gentle smile. Inside was a note written in Jason's clean, firm handwriting and a folded receipt from a hearing center. Paid in full. "You've spent your life listening with your heart. Now it's time to hear the world that's been waiting for you." Eli froze, his breath caught. He read it twice, then again. His hands trembled as tears filled his eyes, real, unguarded tears that fell onto the paper. He looked up at Marla, speechless. She smiled softly. "Guess you made a friend." Eli clutched the note to his chest, unable to stop smiling through the tears. A week later, Eli stood outside the hearing clinic, the envelope folded neatly in his jacket. The nurse smiled kindly as she let him in. The process was quick, a series of tests, adjustments, calibrations, and then sound. For the first time since childhood, Eli heard. It started small, the soft hum of the air conditioner, the rustle of paper, his own breathing. Then outside, the sound of birds, cars, footsteps, the world unfolding all at once. He covered his mouth, overwhelmed, laughing through tears. The nurse smiled. "Take your time," she said. When he stepped outside, the city sounded alive, every sound a miracle. He didn't know where to go first, so he went back to the diner. The bell above the door rang, a sound he'd only imagined before. He paused for a moment, listening, smiling. Marla looked up from the register and froze when she saw him, and the hearing aids glinting softly behind his ears. "You can hear me now," she said, her voice shaking. Eli nodded, tears forming again. "Yes," he whispered, his own voice uncertain, unused but real. Marla rushed around the counter and hugged him. "Oh, honey, that's wonderful." The other waiters clapped quietly, smiling. And then, as if fate had planned it, the door opened again. Jason Statham stepped in. Eli turned, eyes wide. He hesitated, then walked up to him, each step echoing in his newfound world. Jason smiled. "How's it sound?" Eli laughed. It came out choked, raw, beautiful. "Like life," he said softly. Jason nodded, pride flickering in his eyes. "Good." Eli looked down, then pulled something from his apron, the note Jason had written that first night. "You can't always hear kindness, but it's there." He held it up and smiled. "Now I can." Jason's jaw tensed slightly. He wasn't one for emotion, but in that moment, even he couldn't hide the small glimmer in his eyes. He reached out and shook Eli's hand firmly. "Keep being the man you are." Eli nodded. "I will." As Jason left the diner, he looked back once. The place was alive again, laughter, music, plates clinking, voices overlapping. But at one table stood Eli, smiling, laughing, hearing every sound for the first time, surrounded by people who'd once looked past him but now truly saw him. Jason stepped into the sunlight, slipping his hands into his pockets, a faint smile crossing his face. Because sometimes heroes don't wear capes. Sometimes they just walk into a diner and remind the world what kindness sounds like.